Good evening, everyone. I'm Ezad, and I'm here to share my experience preparing for the part one. What worked, what didn't, and how you can study smarter and not harder. So when I first sat for this exam, I learned the hard way that knowledge alone isn't enough. I actually failed my first attempt, and at that point, it was a tough pill to swallow. But that experience forced me to reflect, refine my study methods, and approach my preparation with a better structure and discipline. On my second attempt, Alhamdulillah, I passed, and that journey completely changed how I look at exam preparation. Today, I'll walk you through some of the strategies and lessons that helped me get through it, hopefully saving you from repeating my mistakes. And I want this session to be interactive, not just me talking for an hour plus. So please jump in anytime, ask questions, share your own challenges or tips, and make this a shared learning experience. I'm not standing here today because I did everything perfectly. I actually far from it. I've made mistakes, including one serious technical error that could have cost me the exam. But through all that, I learned what actually works, and then not just in theory. So let me start with a brief introduction about myself. My name is Ezad bin Muhammad Yusof. I'm currently a GP and the PIC at Polyclinic New Central, where I've been working since 2015. It's located in Brickfields and also near KL Central. So if you ever happen to be around the area, feel free to drop by and say hi. Over the years, we've expanded to open another branch called Polyclinic Central Putra Heights, and I'm currently practicing at both clinics. I graduated from University College Dublin in 2019 and completed my housemanship in Hospital Prajaya from 2010 to 2011. And then after that, I served a year at Klinik Kesihatan Kembang Besar Melaka before returning to Klang Valley to work as a medical officer in ENT department at Hospital Prajaya. Not long after that, I decided to leave government sector to explore private practice. At one point, I also ventured into aesthetic medicine for about a year, but I realized it wasn't actually my passion. So eventually, I joined the GCFM program in 2018, and here I am about 7 years later, give or take, still learning, growing, and sharing this journey with all of you. So that's all about me. Okay, so just a quick update about the upcoming Part 1 exam. The exam dates have been confirmed. It will be held on the 14th and 15th of March 2026. Now, for those observing Ramadan, that period will fall just before Hari Raya Aidilfitri, which is expected to be around 20th or 21st March, depending on, of course, the sighting of the moon. So, similar to this year, the exam will take place during fasting month. That means Muslim will be fasting throughout the exam days. Subuh will be around 6:12 to 6:15 a.m. and the exam starts at around 9 a.m. sharp. So there's roughly about 3-hour gap between sahur and the start of the paper. So a few general tips for those fasting during exam days: have a balanced sahur, including slow releasing carbs like oats or whole grains, plus some protein to sustain your energy levels. And then avoid overly salty or spicy food at sahur because they'll make you thirstier later on. And try to stay hydrated the night before and pace your revision so that you are not exhausted by the morning. So use your energy strategically. The first few hours after sahur are when your mind is sharpest, so take advantage of that. Finally, keep your mindset calm and focused. It's challenging, yes, but many have done it successfully before, so me included. So it's definitely manageable with good preparation. So plan your study and sleep schedule early and practice doing mock exams around the same timing, about 9 a.m. after sahur, so your body gets used to the rhythm. So alright, let's move on to the AFPM M-Rooms platform. This is something all candidates should already have access to. This section here focused on this section here at the under the exam support module and M-Rooms. There's a very few resources for both part 1 and part 2 of the conjoined exam. So for those sitting for part 1, I'd like you to focus on the arrowed regions you see here, okay, and then specifically the AKT and the KIP section. So these areas contains few example questions and importantly guidance on how to structure your answers. So please spend some time exploring those. And then you see the AFPM exam handbook listed here as well. Just take note, the version available in the M-Rooms is the 2023 edition, which is a bit outdated. So there's 2025 ones, but that I can share later, although I'm not sure whether there's any differences in both versions. So okay, so I highly recommend you having countdown to your exam date on your phone, so setting it as a widget on your home screen. You can use apps like Countdown Buddy for iPhone or Countdown Widget for Android. Both are easy to use and actually free. And then once you've set it up, it'll display the number of days, hours, and even 7 minutes left until the exam. Okay, so you can see mine here on the left side. I had it counting down to my part 2 exam. Every time I unlock my phone, it was right there reminding me how close I was getting. Now, this isn't meant to create stress. It's meant to keep you aware and accountable. Sometimes we lose track of time with work, with family, and other responsibilities, and suddenly the exam is just around the corner. So seeing the countdown daily helps you plan realistically. For example, when to start mocks, when to revise, and then when to rest. Think of it as your gentle nudge, not anxiety, but more towards awareness. And when that number starts dropping fast, it will motivate you to push a little harder each day. So just set it up today. It takes about 2 minutes, but it will help you to keep your preparation timeline front and center. Okay, let's move on to something really practical, which is active recall. This is honestly one of the biggest game changers for me in the preparing for part 1. So usually first you need to break down your syllabus into manageable weekly chunks. Be specific. For example, during week 1, okay, you can concentrate on cardio. Week 2, you can concentrate on endocrine. Week 3, women's health. It gives you structure and reduces that overwhelmed feeling. Okay, and then next you pick solid references sources such as Malaysia CPG, the John Murtagh, the RACGP, Red and Green Book, Up to Date, etc. And then you would apply active recall in practice by practicing closed book Q&A. You can use flashcards, digital or paper. You can also do a blurting method. You can do case recall, and then you can teach others as well. Okay, the flashcard app I use is the Note app, KNOWT. So you can scan the QR code here as well if you want to look for it in your you can look at this at App Store or your Google Play. Alright, so the next is the third step will be the spaced repetition. Okay, so you revisit topics at interval. So you can repeat this at 1 day, and then the first day, and then the third day, and then 1 week after, and then 2 weeks after, and then after 1 month. You can use your phone calendar for this. So this keeps knowledge fresh and prevents that last minute panic revision. And then next you would integrate interleaving. Okay, so don't just study one system for hours. Mix them up. Maybe cardio for an hour, and then endocrine, and then mental health. It keeps your brain active and helps you connect concepts better. Think of it as a gym cross training for your memory. And then simulate exam condition. Okay, so this is basically do content that is familiar, such as do weekly mini tests such as 20 to 30 MCQs, use KFP style recall, read a case stem, then generate answers without options before checking. And then afterwards you can debrief any mistakes and to see whether it's a knowledge problem, whether it's an interpretation problem, or whether it's a misreading the question kind of problem. Okay, so the next one is sample active recall routine. So once you understand the principles of active recall, the next question is, how do you actually apply it in a real study session? So this slide actually shows you my personal 2-hour routine. Sometimes something I use throughout my part 1 preparation. It's flexible, but this structure really keeps your session focused and efficient. So step 1, basically you can you start with a quick warm-up, about 20 minutes maximum. So just skim your high yield notes or summary sheets to refresh your memory. This is not like a deep studying. Okay, this is just to prime your brain for recall. If you spend too long here, you'll end up rereading instead of remembering. Sometimes I even time myself using a Pomodoro timer, if you've heard of it before. So I do about 20 minutes and that's it. And then step 2 is then I will go straight into testing myself. Okay, so I use flashcards, or I use the blurting method, which simply means writing down everything you can remember without looking at your notes. It's uncomfortable at first, but that's where real learning happens. You can use either paper or digital apps such as the Anki apps, the Note app like I mentioned earlier, and as well as Quizlet if you prefer digital. If you ever tried blurting, react with a thumbs up. I'm curious how many of you do this regularly. Okay, so the next one is step 3, is where you spend about 10 minutes, okay, and checking your answers or comparing what you have already recalled with the actual source. The goal here isn't to mark yourself whether right or wrong. It is to find any gaps. So those gaps become your focus topics for the next session. So I usually highlight my weak spots in different colors colors when I'm writing them down, and then it makes it easy to track progress over time. And then now come the most important exam relevant part, which is the practice questions. You spend the next 30 minutes doing about 20 to 30 MCQs or one KFP style case. This stimulates the actual test environment and forces you to, apply knowledge under mild time pressure. Sometimes I do this with friends on Zoom. We discuss our reasoning after each case. That peer discussion really sharpens your clinical thinking. And then the step 5, finally, end of the session, I would revisit older topics or flashcard. This is your space repetition punya moment. Okay, so it keeps older material fresh, so you don't forget what you studied 2 weeks ago. So these steps only take about 15 to 20 minutes, but gives huge long-term benefits. So that's the full 2-hour active recall routine. It's structured, realistic, and adaptable. Even if you only have an hour, you can scale it down proportionately. And then, the key takeaway here is just not to just read. Okay, you need to recall, apply, and also revisit. That's what builds exam confidence and long-term retention. Okay, all right. Let's go through the structured study plan from 30th of October this year until March 2026, which is when your exam is at. Okay, the goal here is to give you a clear, realistic roadmap, so you know exactly what to study each week and how to pace your progress. So to those that already has started with your own plan, continue, and you may ignore this. Okay, but for those who still in the dark, you can follow this and then add on a few things. Okay, so the plan actually runs for about 21 weeks. If you look here, you'll have 1 until 21 weeks. Okay, because that's how much time you would have until the exam. Okay, so basically week 1 until week 17 is where you do your core, you concentrate on your core system, so you cover CVS, endocrine, etc. And then at week 18, okay, you will concentrate on your practice management and public health. This is important as well, not to forget before the exam. Okay, so this includes your clinic safety, vaccine cold chain, and also outbreak management. And then week 19 to 21 is where you consolidate. Okay, so you do your full mocks. Okay, you do your targeted review, and then you rest before the exam. That is very important. Okay, so each week you would integrate Malaysia CPG, you can and also the RACGP resources, and then you start with around 120 MCQs per week, and you build up to 230 by the final phase. While KFP, you can increase from doing 6 cases to about 14 to 18 per week. Okay, and then if there's any error, okay, whether it's whether you are misreading the question or if there's any knowledge gap, it goes into your error log, and gets converted into a flashcard. So that's how you actively learn and retain information. Okay, so basically you can have like a scheduled checkpoints. Okay, so basically at week 1 you do a baseline test, and then at week 4 you do a mini mock. Okay, and then at week 8 until 12 you do a full checkpoints, and then at week 16 you do a full simulation mock, and then by week 19 to 20 you do a full exam simulation time. Okay, so how your weekly rhythm looks like, okay, it should look like this. So Monday to Thursday you do your reading and your daily AKTs. Okay, and then on Friday you do consolidation. Okay, so basically when you shift from learning new content to reinforcing, you integrate and then you apply what you've already studied. And then you start Saturday you can focus on KFE, and then Sunday you do a rest, or you can do a light recall if you're nervous. And then even just having 2 to 3 hours a day, you can make steady progress. Okay, so it's not too late. Okay, for busy periods, okay, such as when you have increased workload, family matters, you can just scale down to 30 questions daily blocks, and then prioritize question practice and also error review over rather than doing new readings. Okay, and then do consistent this meaning consistent matters in this, okay, more than intensity. So this plan gives you a bit of a structure. You have your own milestone, and then give you some flexibility. If you follow it, you'll cover all the domains while keeping a sustainable pace. Just remember that a good study plan isn't about doing more, it's about doing it right and consistently. So now, before we go deeper into study strategies, I think it's really important to acknowledge the limitation of our exam system itself. Understanding these challenges help us plan better, because many of the struggles we face aren't due to lack of effort, but because of system structure. Okay, so let's go through some of the main main limitation most of us face as a local conjoined candidates. Okay, first is because of heavy reliance on the first big challenge is actually we are on our own, because unlike master program with structured teaching and supervision, we mostly study independently. That means it's up to you to plan, it's up to you to find materials and keep yourself accountable. It builds discipline, yes, but it can also feel isolating, okay, especially during busy clinic weeks. So anyone, just a quick hands up, anyone here currently studying solo? Okay, yeah, so basically you're not alone. Okay, right. Next is our main resources for the exam are based on Australian guidelines like the RACGP, Red Book, and if you know about therapeutic guidelines, okay, it's a very comprehensive site with condition and then medication and doses. Okay, these are high quality, but not all recommendation fit our Malaysian healthcare context. For example, such as some access to investigations, access to medications, or referral pathway can be very different. So part of our job is to adapt those guidelines to local practice without losing exam relevance, because our local practice is the priority in our exam. Okay, and then next, let's talk about some logistic and scheduling issues. Firstly, our local conjoined exam is only held once a year. So if you don't pass, you'll have to wait an entire year before you can reattempt, which can be quite demotivating and disruptive to training plans lah. So in contrast, Australian RCGP exam is conducted twice a year, which gives candidates more flexibility and a shorter waiting period if they need to, resit. Secondly, let's look at the scheduling intensity as well. So in Malaysia, the AKT and KFP are held on consecutive days, which can be very demanding both mentally and physically. So fatigue often becomes a real issue, especially for those balancing work and last-minute revision. Because meanwhile in Australia, these two components are usually held over 2 separate weekends. So this allows candidate a bit more time to recover, from AKT before going into KFP and refocus between papers. Actually, this is more, overall a more balanced structure if you ask me. So even though, the local system has improved in many ways, the scheduling remains a significant challenge that impacts performance and also preparation. Okay. The next one is, this is true because it's, for mock exam. Okay, mock exam, there aren't many locally available AKT or KFE mock sessions that simulate the real exam pressure or marking system. So we often feel we have to rely on self-assessment, which isn't always accurate. That's where practice banks like Past Medicine or GP Academy help. So they're not perfect, but they can train your timing and also logic. Next is about, then of course there's cost. Between exam fees, subscription, and even travel, preparation can get very expensive, and this may limit access to quality question banks or workshops. So if you are already on a tight budget, I suggest prioritizing 1 or 2 higher paid resources and supplement this with materials like from Clinic Room or RCGP guidelines. And then, lastly, unpredictability. The exam covers a huge breadth of primary care topics. Even if you prepare well, some areas may be underrepresented. That's why it's important not to rely on popular topics alone. Balance your study across all systems, especially mental health and chronic disease management. Okay, so let's talk about how I actually prepared for part 1, what materials I use, and how I studied on daily basis. These are methods that work for me personally after failing the first attempt and refining my approach for the second one. I've broken it down to 5 key areas. The first one is read daily. Okay, my foundation was consistency. Okay, I made it a habit to read every day, even if it was just 20 to 30 minutes. So my go-to references are the Malaysia CPG, of course, and then your John Mota General Practice textbook, and then your clinic, and then the Clinic Room, which is great for quick algorithm-based revisions. I kept my notes very simple, just using key phrases and management points, not paragraphs. That made it easier to review later, especially closer to the exam. Okay, and then one of the best ways to study is through your own patients. Okay, every patient encounter is a potential revision session. So whether it's diabetic review, asthma control, or preventive screening. So after clinic, I would reflect. I would ask myself, did I apply the guideline correctly? What else could I have done differently? So this kind of active reflection helps you remember far better than passive reading. So you are learning in context, exactly what the KFP tests. Okay, and then I went completely digital for my study notes and flashcards. For my study notes, I use GoodNotes on iPad for handwritten summaries and diagrams. It is structured, searchable if I need to suddenly find it, and then search for it, and then of course environmentally friendly. So And then for the flashcards, I use Note app, and can also convert typed notes into flashcards automatically for quick recall sessions later. So this combination helps me to revise efficiently without carrying around a stack of paper. But if you prefer traditional flashcards, that's fine. The key is consistency and not the platform. Okay, next, I think is more relevant to me, maybe relevant to some of you as well. I pair with colleagues. Okay, I form a small discussion groups where we would quiz each other, and run through mini Viva style session, and then this teaching will others really reinforces your understanding. It's sometimes you call it a protege effect. So even explaining one topic clearly to a peer, to a friend, it helps you realize what you truly know and what you don't. So in summary, my method was simple. I read daily, I practice while working, I go digital, and then I use question banks, and then I collaborate with others. So this combination kept me consistent and confident without me feeling burned out. Okay, and then remember, there's no actually a single perfect strategy, but the best plan is the plan that you can stick to every day. Alright, this slide shows my main clinical reference websites, especially basically the ones I use most often when I'm preparing for exam or managing cases, especially when clinic room isn't as helpful. So first, the most important one is the RCH website. I use this a lot for pediatric conditions. It's an excellent references. It's very practical and it aligns well along with our local pediatric protocol 4th edition. There's now the 5th edition, but I think they are trying to amend that. I can't download it for some reason. So it's my go-to whenever I need clarification in pediatrics. Next is also a very important website for me. It is a fantastic site. This is called SiteDB. It's a fantastic site for psychiatry. It covers all major psychiatric conditions. And what I love most is the mnemonics. It really helps with my recall, especially for exam type question. If you are the type of person who learn by mnemonics lah, but if you are someone who you don't like mnemonics, you like to do your own style, then it's up to you first. And then of course our NAG, our National Antibiotic Guidelines. We rely on for our antibiotics prescription. So it's useful when deciding even for empirical choices that fits our Malaysian context. And then the next one would be DermNet. Of course you know this. So basically it's most people dermatology Bible. So it has excellent image collection, some of which even appears in the exam. It's my first stop to anything dermatological basically. And then next you would have your RACGP website. So the RACGP website is another key one. I put this at number 5, but because I use it less than the others. So basically I often browse for AJGP article and also for your checks. Both are excellent to reinforce clinical reasoning and aligned with family medicine practice standards. So next is BMJ best practice. So for general condition, I find that BMJ best practice is very helpful. It's UK based, it's concise, and it gives you a quick overview, including first and second line investigations, which I find handy during the exam prep. Next is I think I will skip auto bullet because for some people it can be a bit advanced. But I do look at them for common fractures and management for common fractures. You don't have to use this site. Towards the end, I also used I just checked GPT some of the condition. I think that one is easier as well. And then the last one is up to date. So I usually only refer to this for rare conditions or when I can't find answers elsewhere. So it's very comprehensive. It's evidence based, of course, but at times it's a bit too detailed for our purpose. So it's still an important resource nonetheless. So this one is for those of you who spend a lot of time driving or commuting, you can still study while on the go. I actually started a podcast called Dr. Ezzat Survival Notes. It was my own list for my own listening while on the go initially, but I've shared this with one or two friends who wanted to listen as well. And it is available on Spotify and also on Apple Podcasts. So it's basically a bite-sized episode I recorded while preparing for my part 2 exam. It's more practical, short, and straight to the point. You can just play it in the car during your commute or even while doing your chores. So it's a nice way to keep learning without feeling like you're studying all the time. And And then, but just a small disclaimer, it's not comprehensive yet. It's only covered, I've only managed to cover a few topics that I found relevant for prepping for part 2, but I will try to keep updating as I go along. Alright, so now this next slide is for those who wants to do Murta. Okay, I'm doing this is 8th edition. So I know many of us do or do not, okay, but because it's one of the key reference for our family medicines, a few of the senior examiner also advised to read Murta, okay. But let's be realistic, okay, at this stage with just a few months left before the exam, it's probably too late to cover everything from Murta. So please don't stress about reading it cover to cover, okay, there's no time for that, okay. So what I've done here is I have shortlisted the chapters that are worth going through if time permits. The one marked with a yellow triangle are the most important. These are high yield chapters that will give you the most benefit for both AKT and KFP. The one marked with the red exclamation mark are also important but not really essential, meaning they are useful for deeper understanding but you can safely skip them if the time is tight. And finally, the thumbs up are somewhat important but they are more of general interest or background knowledge. Again, if you have time, if you've gone through everything else, then you can read the ones that I put thumbs up here. Okay, so I did not include chapters that already have a good coverage in our Malaysia CPG. So I didn't include because since we already have local guidelines, and local guidelines should always take precedence for exam preparation. So topics like hypertension, diabetes, asthma and COPD, those are better revised directly from the CPG rather than from Murta. Okay, so don't worry if you haven't covered everything in Murta, okay, because hardly anyone does, but just focus on high yield sections, connect them with the CPGs, and then you'll be in a strong position for the exam. Okay, so this slide basically talk about the cost of preparation. There are a lot of online resources out there and prices can vary widely, so it's important to know what's worth investing in. So I've summarized here the common resources I personally used or reviewed with their approximate prices and access details. The most expensive of all is GP Academy, okay, especially considering the price is about 2,375 Australian dollar. It's simply the most expensive one, and it's one of the most comprehensive prep programs, especially for AKT and KFP. The price differ depending on when you register. So because early registration costs more, because the more months you have access to, the more expensive it is. Even the 2,375 one is limited access to 2 to 3 months, I think, if I can recall. So it's quite pricey, but they do have structured mock exams, they do have feedbacks, and then they do have like a video tutorials for topics that is not covered elsewhere. Okay, so if you are someone who needs guided structure, then this might be a good investment. Next is of course your clinic room, which is quite popular among Malaysian candidates because they do have prices for Malaysian candidates as well. It's more affordable. It's around 500 USD for 12 months access, and it's designed specifically with local context in mind. So you'll find guideline-based algorithm and concise summaries which are great for quick daily readings or discussion with study groups. It's an excellent value if you are studying it as a group as well. And then next you have your BMJ and Past Medicine, also varying prices. Okay, and then you do have your free preparation. Okay, so basically it comes free with your RACGP membership. Okay, it's not actually free, you pay membership every year. It includes the SAPT, which I really want you to look at it, and then it's very similar to the real AKT format. So if you already are, of course all of you are already RACGP membership members, so make full use of this. It's one of the few resources that truly mirrors the exam tone. So basically there's also ModMed. Okay, I don't use ModMed. I did use ModMed I think during my first year of ATFM. So after that I don't subscribe to it anymore, but a lot of people also been using ModMed. Okay, so there's also a special price for FPM, you can use that. And then there's also Past GP. It's a new website. I think I heard good reviews about it, but I don't know, I haven't tried it before. Okay, so basically you don't need to buy everything. Please don't buy everything. Okay, just pick one or two main resources, maybe combine structured platform like Clinic Room or even the expensive one like GP Academy, and then with one question bank like maybe Past Medicine. I generally wouldn't recommend sharing subscription with too many people. Actually it's not advisable advisable to even share with anyone, okay? But because as websites can detect concurrent access and they may suspend the account. So if sharing is necessary, try to log in at different times, but do note the risk still exists, okay? Right, so there are a few limitations, okay, even with the expensive one. I think you need to be realistic about the study materials that you use. There are plenty resources like I mentioned earlier, okay? So there are weaknesses as well. So knowing these weaknesses, I think is very important. So for most of this, okay, GP Learning, Clinic Room, even Past Medicine is UK based, GP Academy is Australian based. All this, they don't follow our local guidelines, so sometimes it differ a little bit. So that's why you need to have like a strong foundation in your Malaysia CPG. So when you're doing these resources, then you know how to what is practiced here and that differ from what they are practicing, okay? And then so I get question about past years as well. All right, so okay, past years is a bit tricky. All right, apart from the 2023 recall, most past year recalls floating around are either incomplete, unreliable, or too short because it is based on memory recalls, okay? And based on recent trends, most questions are never repeated, so it's risky to depend on them. So but then you can use past years to understand the exam flows, but don't base your preparation on these alone, okay? And then you do have your modules questions as well. For quick reading, you can read them, but they are too short. The questions are too short, and it doesn't at all reflect the complexity, or you can to integrate them into your AKT. So that's why for concept or for learning purpose, maybe you do that, but do not gauge your exam readiness based on module questions, okay? Right, finally, that being said, okay, I also want to highlight something very important, okay? I've known quite a few candidates who did not subscribe to all this long list of paid resources and yet still managed to score band 6 or band 7 with no trouble. So remember, it's not about how many resources you have, it's about how effectively you use the ones that you do have, okay? So like I said, consistency, and then maybe if you want, you can get 2 or 3 good resources. That's enough already, okay? So now I want to share a bit about my own experience sitting for the AKT exam. Not just what worked, but also what didn't, okay? Because sometimes hearing what not to do can save you from making the same mistakes I did. And trust me, this exam is not just about knowledge. It's a test of focus, it's a test of endurance, and also discipline as well. Okay, it's a mentally exhausting exam. The AKT is incredibly mentally draining. I personally find the AKT is harder than KFA, to be honest. The stems are long, much longer than the ones that you see in SAPT or even mock exams. Some of them go on for about 15 lines or more, with lots of irrelevant details mixed in to test your focus. So when I sat for it, I was fasting, which definitely made it more challenging, but it was still manageable with pacing and good hydration during sahur. But just be mentally prepared, because this is like a 4-hour marathon of concentration. So before you go in, make sure you are well rested, mentally alert, and also prepared to stay focused for the full 4-hour duration. So the second mistake I made is I flagged too many questions because I thought I would come back to them later, but I ran out of time, okay? So there were at least 10 to 15 flag items that I never got back to towards the end. So my advice is only flag a question if you truly have no idea. If you're between 2 options, trust your first instinct. You mark it, okay, and then move on. You'll rarely change your mind later, and even if you do, it's usually from going from right to wrong, okay? So manage your time tightly and don't depend too much on reviewing later. And then the third one is the third things that I learned is that I had read about every topic that came out in the exam, but still I got them wrong, okay? So that's when it really hits me. Reading and memorizing is not enough, okay? So you must practice active recall and question-based learning, because the AKT tests your ability to apply knowledge under time pressure, not just to recognize facts, okay? So while reading guidelines or your resources is important, make sure you are testing yourself with MCQs, and then you regularly revisit your error log regularly, and then train your brain to retrieve information quickly. Okay, and then of course, and the last one is technical issue during the exam. My computer actually froze during the exam for about 3 minutes. If this ever happens to you, immediately raise your hand and inform the exam coordinator. You are entitled to that lost time. Okay, so I did not do that because the coordinator was busy attending to the candidates at the back, and I didn't want to waste any more time. So, but in hindsight, I think I should have, because even a few minutes matter when you are under pressure, especially in the AKT exam. So please, if there's any technical glitch, don't hesitate, report it immediately. Alright, let's move to the AKT exam tips. Okay, so in this slide, I'll share some general tips for the AKT, but I think the next slide is actually what makes a difference personally for me. So you can read the slides later and or later on if you want, but I won't go too deep into this because I think my next slide is more important. Okay, so these are small strategies that make a big difference for me, especially in the second attempt. They are not actually textbook techniques, but practical things that help me to stay calm and think clearly during the exam. So number one, this might seem unconventional, but hear me out. Okay, read the question, the heading of the question, and answer first before going to the step. I actually start by skimming the question and then the answer options first before I read the whole case stem, the scenario. Why I do this? Because it helps it helps me to look for what I need to look for. Okay, so whether to focus on diagnosis, whether to focus on management, or whether to focus on investigation, and that saves me from rereading the stem multiple times. It also helps me to spot key clues quickly, which is a huge time saver in longer cases. So you can try this during your mocks. You'll be surprised how much smoother your pace becomes when you do this. Okay, and then the next one would be manage your time like a pro. Of course, the AKT is a long exam. It's about 150 questions over 4 hours, and time management can make or break your result. So if you're unsure about a question, trust your gut instinct. Okay, choose your best answer and mark it with a star of don't overthink, because 9 out of 10 times your first instinct is usually correct. So I learned this the hard way because most of the answers I changed later turn out to be wrong. So keep moving forward and save at least 10 to 15 minutes at the end to review flat questions. You need to think AKT as a marathon and not a sprint. So steady pacing is all the way through is important. Okay, so watch the question terminology. So now this one's subtle, but it's also very important. Words like most likely, next initial, confirmatory test, or most important can completely change what the examiner is asking. So always pay attention to these qualifiers because they tell you the level of reasoning required for the question. Okay, and then if you're stuck between two good answers, you go back to the question and you recheck the exact wording. The clue is often hidden in that single phrase. Okay, and then use process of elimination. So when the answer isn't obvious, you start ruling out the wrong ones. Even eliminating one or two options would improve your odds. So it helps you think more clearly. So if you're down to two possible answers, use your clinical reasoning. So you look for clues in the stem, like the patient's comorbidities, contraindications like allergies, or the setting of your practice as well, to decide which one fits best. It's all about pattern recognition from your practice lah. Okay, and then answer as you go. This one is really important. Okay, please mark your answers as you go. In my first attempt, I made a very huge mistake. For the uncertain question, I waited until the end to transfer all my answers, and I ran out of time. Okay, so don't do that. Even if you are unsure, pick your best answer, mark it, and move on. You can always revisit flat questions later if time allows. I personally aim to finish all questions about 10 to 15 minutes early because that buffer time makes a huge difference. Okay, and then of course, don't overthink. Alright, if a question stumps you, just move on. Sometimes later questions can jog your memory for earlier ones. So it's okay to get a few wrong because the pass mark allows for that. Okay, so if you get like 50 wrong out of 150, you will still most likely pass. Of course, this depends on the curve of the exam lah. Okay, so the real danger here is actually wasting 10 minutes stuck on one question and leaving 20 unanswered at the end. So trust your preparation, trust your instinct, and just keep moving. Okay, now let's talk about the KFE, the key feature problem exam. A lot of candidates find this intimidating at first, but once you understand the structure, and it becomes much more manageable. And just to reassure you, don't worry too much about mastering all the KFP techniques right now. In the coming weeks, we'll be focusing specifically on how to answer KFP step by step, and then you'll also be joining the Buddy Brigade sessions starting in December, where you'll practice real cases together and get feedback in a supportive environment. So plus it's pretty much depends on the KFP pretty much depends on the examiner marking scheme as well, right? So yeah, so first understand what the exam is testing. Each case is designed to assess your clinical reasoning, how you think, not how much you can memorize. So when reading the STEM, identify the key details, the setting, whether it's in the urban clinic, rural clinic, or even mobile clinics, the age of the patient, the comorbidities of the patient, and the medication the patient is already on, because all this can change your management priorities. Okay, next is time management is also crucial. You'll have 25 cases and about 8 minutes per case. Some cases are short and straightforward, others are very long and layered. So don't overcode, write concisely, no ands, ifs or buts. Okay, so if you need to give one example, give it in a bracket and that's it. If you're stuck, move on, flag it and then come back later. Remember, you don't have to be perfect on every case to pass. Okay, and then the next one is how to phrase answers. Be specific. Don't write the answers like diabetes. Instead, write for the full, type 2 diabetes mellitus. Use action verbs and complete diagnosis, diagnostic or management terms. For example, you write start oral amoxicillin 500 milligrams TDS for 5 days instead of just saying give antibiotics. But also depends on the context of the question now. Okay, so this is not generalized for every question. Bear that in mind. Okay, and then avoid common errors. These are few traps that few candidates may fall into, such as writing long, winding answers. Remember, overcoding can reduce your overall marks for that particular question. So another thing is missing red flags differential or urgent steps like calling for an ambulance or ordering key investigation. And then the next one is ignoring important clues in the STEM like abnormal vitals or the social context of the patient. Another important thing that is not written here, if a question asks for a list of investigation choices, for example, from A to Z, and then most likely they ask about maybe up to 5 to 10 investigation, please only choose the exact amount of answers. If you accidentally provide more answers, you will get 0. So this can easily happen when you are, when they ask for 10 investigation and then you accidentally put in 11 codes and dah dapat 0. Okay, so you need to make sure you count how many codes. If they ask for 10, make sure there's only 10 codes, because if you turn right 11 codes, then you'll get 0 for that question. So it's a waste of marks there, right? Okay, and then structure your thought process. So when you practice, try to structure your reasoning. Okay, use 3 layers of reasoning lah. Okay, so you can use diagnostic reasoning. So you can say like what is the most likely diagnosis, what's important diagnosis to exclude, and then you can next is your management reasoning. So what is the immediate management, what is the short term management, what is the long term management. So you need to differentiate this kind of reasoning lah. And then the last one is preventive reasoning. So you want to think about lifestyle, you want to think about screening, you want to think about vaccination if relevant. So having this internal structure will help you to answer logically and prevent missing key components in your answers. And then before you submit, recheck the always do a quick recheck lah. Use your written 1 to 25 checklist to make sure you didn't skip a case, and then if time allow, review the flag question. But and this is important, don't change answers unless you are absolutely sure your first reasoning was wrong, because like I mentioned earlier, your first instinct is usually right lah in most cases. Okay, so that's how that's the overview of how I approach the KFP. Remember, this is just the foundation. In the coming weeks, we'll go deeper into techniques on how to break down the STEM and how to identify key features and how to trace your responses for possible maximum marks. And then once the Buddy Brigade session start in December, you'll have plenty opportunity to practice and then learn from each other as well. Alright, so during my part 1 KFP exam, I made a technical error that could actually have cost me the paper. Okay, so I'm sharing this so that no one else repeat the same mistake. So in the KFP, the front page will have the front page will have the exam instruction, and then once you click start attempt, you will enter your first case. So each case is usually about 15 to 30 minutes, 30 lines long. So it contains your scenario lah, and then after the stem, you'll find a series of short answer questions, and then at the top right corner, there's a flag top left corner, there's a flag icon if you wish to flag them for review later. And then at the bottom right, at the bottom, you'll have your bottom of the whole question, you'll have your answer box. So it's a big box, okay, and then they are labeled manually with letters and numbers so that you don't miss, like, if they ask for 2 management, then they write there 1 and 2 so that you don't miss any question, any point, any marks lah. And then this is where you type your response along with, there's next button next to it, okay, and then the next button, and also at the bottom of the page, there's the case number in boxes, okay, so there's 1 to 25 at the footer there, okay, and then 25 boxes, okay, and then if you've already attempted, then it'll become gray, and then if you flag the question, it'll become red, okay. And then here's what went wrong during my exam, okay. So I paced myself about 8 minutes per case, and everything went smoothly until case 23, and orang asli, I think case of suspected acute pancreatitis. After submitting that case, after I finished that case, I clicked next at the bottom right to move forward to the next case. However, immediately I decided to revisit the case again. I go back, okay. So I think case 24 already loaded at that time, but I did not look at the question. So basically, I just immediately went back to the orang asli case again. So I edited a little bit, and then once I finished, I click next again, okay. So unbeknownst to me, okay, when I do that, okay, when I click next, it skipped the case 24 entirely and loaded case 25 instead. So because once you load the page, okay, say the case 24 page, then the system automatically mark the case 24 as attempted. So at the bottom footer there, the box will turn grey, even though I have not written anything, even I haven't read or written anything in the answer boxes, okay. So at the end of the paper, I only reviewed my flag, of course, the red cases only. So, and then I missed the fact that I missed 1 case unanswered, basically, okay. So thankfully I still passed, but the 2-month wait for the result was agonizing. I later learned from the examiners during the ASC pre-conference briefing that actually several candidates made the same mistakes lah, so not just me. So maybe it's one of you who also missed your case, you didn't realize it, okay. And then my advice is, okay, before the exam timer starts, where you have your rough paper beforehand, so write down case 1 to 25, okay, and then as you go through each case, you tick them off manually. So this ensures that you don't accidentally skip any cases, even if the system marks them as attempted, okay. Right, so yeah, so this is the example. Actually, I just recreated this, but it may not be exactly the same. But here's the red flag over on the left side, and next at the bottom, and then the footer there, you will have your boxes from 1 to 25, and then if you flag the question, it'll become red here. And then if you already attempted the question, or if you already loaded the case, the page, then it'll become gray automatically, okay. Alright, so thankfully, okay, there's probably a light at the end of the tunnel. Yesterday, coincidentally, I logged into the AFPM MRoom site, and then I noticed something new. There's an extra section titled Backup Conjoined Part 1 Examination 2024, if you look at the red circle over here. And then at first thought, I thought maybe these are past year's questions. So out of curiosity, I clicked on it, and then after pressing start attempt, this came out, and something the bottom one, okay. So there is after pressing start attempt, some random scenario. I don't know whether this is scenario or not, something about FIFA, okay. So and then it hit me, maybe this is not random after all, okay. So because if you remember, during the ASC pre-conference, I actually raised a concern to the examiners about the Miss KFP case, and at the time I was told it was something beyond their control, because the answer box, if they have to manually put on the heading like A, B, or 1, 2, 3, so basically the only way to to make sure that it grades out is when you load the page itself, because they already filled in manually the numbers for you to answer. So I think that was quite difficult for them to change. message. But when I saw this, the bottom ones, okay, it occurred to me that perhaps maybe they are now working to address that issue. So if you look closely, the answer box now appears immediately after each question. So this could be their way to ensure that in future exam, even if a case is loaded and you haven't answered anything yet, it will not automatically change the status of the case from attempted or grayed out unless you actually type the answer in the boxes. Hope you understand what I'm saying. Okay, so for this slide, I want to to show you a more practical way to keep track of your pacing during the exam. I know it's quite difficult to calculate exactly how many minutes you should spend per question. I mean during the exam itself, because you are under pressure, chasing time. So it's instead of focusing on the time per question, I use checkpoints instead. Okay, so for example, in the AKT, when you time it, you can do it like this. So at 9:30, then you should be already been on question 21, and then at 10 a.m. you should be at question 41 already, and so on. So this gives you a quick visual marker of whether you are on track or you are falling behind. So you can write this down, in your rough paper beforehand, just to make sure that you're not far behind your plan, your timing for your exam lah. And then the same goes for KFP. I think KFP is easier. There's only few checkpoints here. So by 9:30 you should be at case 4 already, and then ideally by 12 p.m. you should already be at case 24, finishing all 25 by around 12:10. So you will have about 50 minutes for review. Okay, so personally I find this easier to manage during the exam. I write this checkpoint down, like I mentioned earlier, in a blank paper at the start, and then I can refer them as I go along. It keeps me grounded and help prevent that mid-exam panic, whether I'm going too slow or do I have any time left for review later, So this approach is more about my macro timing, so like a big picture pacing rather than trying to micromanage every minute per question. Right, now let's address a question I get asked quite often. Do AKT and KFP overlap? For a long time, it was believed that the AKT and KFP questions don't repeat at all, and for the most part that is still true. But in recent years, we've noticed that there can be a little bit of overlap, not a lot, just enough to make people wonder. Maybe the examiner is trying to throw you off a little bit to make the exam less predictable. Okay, so for example, during the last exam cycle, there was a pubic lice case that appeared in the AKT, and then a small sub question from that same team reappeared in the KFP. But this is very important, it carried only minor marks, okay, and it wasn't the main focus of the KFP case. So yes, overlaps can happen, but they are rare and never significant enough to base your whole KFP prep on your preparation lah. So you only have less than 24 hours for KFP the next day anyway. So this brings me to a really important point. If you don't perform well as you hope in the AKT, don't feel pressured to re-study every AKT topic, okay, just in case it repeats in the KFP. You need to weigh the tiny benefit of potential overlap against the possible mental toll or anxiety of revisiting old topics that might shake your confidence, okay? Because I've seen candidates who got caught in the cycle. They rehashed AKT material out of fear and then ended up feeling overwhelmed going into their KFP. It's really not worth it, okay? And then my advice is focus on balanced preparation and emotional stability before the KFP. Because once I would advise is once AKT is done, close that chapter and shift your mindset, because the KFP is a different style of exam. It tests your reasoning, it doesn't test your recall much, okay? So instead of chasing possible repeats, spend that time practicing case-based reasoning and walking through KFP style stamps with your study group or your buddy brigade session. And then so basically to summarize, yes, there is a tiny possibility of overlap between AKT and KFP, but it's rare and worth only a few marks. So the bigger priority here is to protect your focus and your confidence and your consistency. So when you go into KFP calm and clear-headed, that's when your reasoning really shines, okay? And that's where you can score in KFP. Right, so this slide is something I think every one of us can relate to, okay? Let's talk about why you should never leave studying to the last minute. Because no matter how much we plan, life has its own sense of humor. It tends to test us right before the exam, okay? So I'll share you a few real reasons and one personal story to show show you exactly why early preparation is so important. Okay. Alright, sorry, I think that's that. Okay. So first, the most unpredictable factor is unexpected life events. Okay. So because life happens, things like illness, things like emergencies, family responsibilities, this can come without warning and completely derail your study plans. So for example, I had actually planned a full 1 week study leave before my part 2 exam. Everything was nicely scheduled and I thought I'd have a final solid revision week. But guess what? I came down with a really bad acute exacerbation of asthma, secondary to possible, bacterial URTI for 1 week until the exam days. Okay, I've done COVID tests, I've done influenza tests, all negative. So, I spent most of that week in bed, not studying at all. I had to take inhaler. During the exam, I had to take inhaler after each station. So my heart rate was probably in the hundreds at the time. And, I was coughing like nobody business. But alhamdulillah, I can still pass. So, that experience really hit me. Even the best plans can fall apart. So if you start early, at least you'll have enough buffer time to absorb these unexpected setbacks without panic, right? So this is exactly why I would remind, all my friends, don't rely on your last week to save you, because it might not be there. Alright, next is workload. Around exam time, clinic duties, family responsibilities, and covering for your colleagues don't magically stop. In fact, it often gets worse. I mean, you get flooded with administrative tasks, your CME, and then your last minute responsibilities. All this can eat into your revision time. Okay, so if you start early, even a busy work week won't destroy your entire study rhythm. And then, for the next one is reduced retention. Okay, cramming might work for short-term memorization, but it doesn't help with long-term recall or clinical reasoning. The AKT and KFP test your ability to apply knowledge, not just remember it. So spaced repetition and consistent practice are key to deep understanding, and those take time. Okay, so when you start early, your brain gets more time to consolidate, and that's what sticks on the exam day. Okay, and then the other things is higher stress and anxiety. Okay, when you study late, you are fighting time pressure, which raises your cortisol and impair your focus. You get tired faster, you get frustrated faster, and then sometimes you just burn out before the big day. So spreading your study over months will protect your energy and confidence and helps you walk into the exam calm and sharp. Yeah, another problem is there's no time for revision or weak area review. Another major problem with late studying is that you don't find your weak areas until it's too late. Maybe you realize you're shaky on maybe mental health or women's health, but there's no time left to revise. So starting early gives you the time to identify and then correct and then reinforce, which is how you build confidence as well. Okay, and then the next one is mix-year learning opportunities. So finally, basically, when you delay your preparation, okay, you will miss out on peer learning. So starting early meaning you can collaborate, you can discuss and learn from others. And remember, our buddy brigade session will start in December. So if you begin revising early, okay, you'll be ready to engage, and then you'll be ready to contribute and make the most out of this discussion. So don't wait until the session starts to open your books. Better you come prepared, and you benefit 10 times more. Okay, so basically, if there's one thing you take away from this slide, is that don't trust your last week or weeks to save you, because sometimes your last week won't be yours. Okay, let's shift gears a little. So we've talked about study strategies, but equally important is how you take care of yourself before the exam. These are my practical lifestyle modification tips, things I personally found helpful and that can make a big difference in keeping you calm, sharp, and focused during the final month of preparation. This isn't just about wellness, it's about performance, because a clear mind learns better, recall faster, and reasons more effectively. Okay, so first is structure your day. Okay, set a consistent schedule. Do like a fixed waking, study, and sleep times. It can help to regulate your circadian rhythm, which means better focus and mood. And use shorter study blocks of 45 to 60 minutes with 5 to 10 minutes breaks in between. And use a weekly planner or your phone calendar even to block time for study, work, rest, and even exercise. Okay, when you plan your week visually, you are less likely to feel lost or overwhelmed. Okay, next is learn to manage stress before it manages you. Obviously, try try short mindfulness or breathing sessions every day. Even 5 minutes can, reset your focus, reflect positively, measure your progress, not your perfection, and avoid comparing yourself with others, because everyone's journey and workload are different. Okay, and very importantly, keep at least one non-study activity in your life. It could be music, it could be sports, or spending time with family, because that small daily reset helps your brain recover and keeps the burnout away. Alright, so basically, don't underestimate the power of movement. Even, light exercise, brisk walking, stretching, or yoga, for 30 minutes a day improves your concentration and energy level. If time is tight, you can do like short movement breaks between session. Even 5 minutes of walking or stretching can wake your brain up lah. So it's not about having a fitness goal. It's about your mental flexibility and also endurance as well. Okay, then this one is very important. Finally, make your sleep non-negotiable. Okay, aim for about 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep. It's actually during sleep that your brain consolidates memory. So avoid late night cramming. Study shows that effectiveness drops sharply after midnight. So power naps of 10 to 15 minutes during the day can even restore alertness as well. So before bed, try to stay away from your screen for at least 30 minutes to help your brain wind down. Okay, so next one is maintain social support. Okay, don't isolate yourself. Stay connected with your family, with your friends, because emotional supports help to buffer any stress or possible stress that you might have. If possible, have a study buddy or a discussion group, because this can keep you more consistent in your preparation. And then if needed, then talk to your loved ones early about your study schedule, okay, so that they understand when you are unavailable and you don't carry that guilt while studying. So I would say like balance is very important as well. Okay, so this is actually quite hard for all of us. Digital discipline. Okay, so limit your social media and news scrolling during your study time. If needed, use app blockers or your phone's focus mode or silent mode, do not disturb or something like that, and then keep only useful study apps like your flashcard apps or your note tools, and remove any distractions you might have. If you can, you can dedicate a separate device lah if you have the means to do it, and it trains your mind to sit there in study mode and not scroll mode. Okay, because let's be honest, how many of you have just checked WhatsApp and lost 30 minutes? So it happens to everyone, right? Okay, so lastly, look after your health. Okay, schedule any pending medical or dental appointment early before you enter the intense study months. Don't ignore minor illnesses. Okay, rest early to prevent prolonged downtime lah. And please keep up with your vaccination. Make sure you have your nutrition in check, and then maintain good hydration, because you can't study when you're running on empty lah. Okay, so all these are just not just a lifestyle tip. It's actually your safety net. So your brain performs best when your body and emotions are balanced. So manage stress, sleep well, move daily, and stay connected. That's the real secret to staying consistent in the months leading to your exam. Okay, so yeah, the next slide is quite interesting. I do feel strongly about this. Okay, when you are preparing for the exam, okay, don't just aim to pass. Okay, aim to score band 8. All right, why? Because this mindset changes the way you prepare. When you aim to simply get through, you'll stop once you feel comfortable. But when you aim to excel, you'll keep refining, you keep improving, and then you keep deepening your understanding. All right, and that's the difference that will that differences will carry you far beyond the exam. Okay, so let's talk about why aiming high matters. Okay, so when you aim high in part 1, you're not just studying for one paper, you are building a solid foundation for part 2. Most of the reasoning skills and clinical frameworks you develop now will directly carry into your part 2 and your clinical encounter and case discussion later. Okay, so the better you understand the why behind management decisions now, the more confident you'll be when you face simulated patients or like Viva style question later. All right, and then number 2 is mastery of core knowledge. Okay, basically band 8 candidates don't just memorize, they master the content. That means understanding how guidelines apply in context, not just reciting them. It's being able to connect a clinical presentation to the underlying reasoning. When you aim for mastery, you'll naturally start integrating information across systems, which is exactly what both AKT and KFP assess. Okay, I'm not saying that I got band 8. Okay, I'm just saying that I'm still trying to get this mastery of our knowledge, but it does help to improve your exam condition later on. Yeah, and so better time management, I won't talk about that. Okay, safety margin. Yeah, so safety margin. Okay, so let's be honest. Exam days are unpredictable, so you might get a bad question, or you can get a case that throws you off, or even just a poor night's sleep. Okay, aiming for a higher score, okay, gives you a safety margin. Even if you underperform slightly, okay, you'll still clear the pass mark comfortably. It's a cushion that actually protects you from the unexpected lah. Okay, and also if you set a high goal, it keeps you motivated. Okay, so it keeps you from pushing yourself consistently. All right, and then in summary, okay, I would just say that don't study just to get through it. Okay, study to actually own it. Okay, because you walk into the exam knowing that you deserve to pass, not by chance but by preparation. All right, and when you see that band 8 or band 7, okay, next to your name, it wasn't luck, it was consistency, it was your effort and your discipline, every single day from now until March or until your part 2 later. Okay, so just remember, just don't aim just to pass, aim to score lah, because your future self, especially prior to part 2 self, will thank you for it. I would really like to take a few minutes on this because they are important. These are the kind of things that don't usually get mentioned during formal prep, okay, but if you're not aware of them, they can cause unnecessary stress or last minute problems, and trust me, it's the last thing you need when you're already preparing for the exam. Okay, so think of this as a small reality check and a friendly heads up. Actually, the kind of advice I genuinely wish someone had told me before I sat for mine. Okay, let's go through this one by one. Okay, please make sure you read through the AFPM postgraduate course guideline and policy handbook. Okay, this document isn't just administrative. Okay, it outlines the rules, the eligibility criteria and expectation for every candidate sitting for the conjoined exam. Okay, and this handbook is essentially your roadmap for compliance and professional conduct throughout your training and also examination process. Many candidates overlook it. It contains key sections that can prevent serious misunderstanding or even disqualifications. Okay, so I strongly recommend you to pay special attention to this section 4.3, academic misconduct. This outlines what constitute academic dishonesty, including plagiarism, data fabrication or unethical behavior during the exam. And then subsection 6.3, which is the eligibility criteria for part 1 conjoined. So this section details the specific entry requirements, the requisites and also documentation needed before you sit for the part 1. And then subsection 6.4 is the eligibility criteria for part 2 conjoined. So make sure you understand what's required after part 1 and includes clinical experience, case submission, standards and also timing of your part 2 eligibility lah. Okay, and then appendix 1. Okay, so later you can look at this. And then appendix 1, looking at the general practice or primary care assessment policy. So this basically explain how assessment are structured and how your training and exam performance are evaluated in alignment with the RACGP standards. Okay, so these are the sections most relevant to us as exam candidates, and reading them early will save you a lot of stress later on. Before submitting your exam form, take a few minutes to review these subsections, even just once, so you are clear about the timelines, documentation and also your expectation. Okay, so it's a small step that can prevent big problems down the road lah. And if you are unsure about any of it, do reach out to AFPM direct. That's very helpful. They are very helpful actually. And it's important that the first effort to understand the policy comes from us, and please avoid any academic dishonesty, because to tell the truth, there are few candidates that were not allowed to take exam because of academic misconduct.